Ayal, do you want to test the media at all?
I think, I mean, there's
Or are you
nothing that
not
we can test.
using?
I'm going to share my screen. Okay, just like nod in your head if you see that it's working.
Yeah,
Great. And
perfect.
can you see this moving? Is it
Yeah,
glitching or is it good?
it's moving. It's not like a smooth, but it's fine. But I can't
Good
imagine that
enough.
it's supposed to be like a. Yeah, it's
When
perfect.
it stops though, it's
When it
clear.
stops, it stops. It's perfect. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay, so I'm stopping the share screen.
So we'll wait another minute or so. Some people are signing on. Okay, so I guess just in the interest of time, we'll get started and people join in. They'll just pick up where we are. So thank you everyone for joining us. If you were at our first session, which was titled Holocaust 101, which was a very brief but informative overview of kind of situating us and giving us some historical perspective. What we didn't do in detail at the last one, which we're going to do today, is look at Auschwitz specifically. And Ayal, if you didn't join us, is an incredible educator who's been working with us and Bill in Israel for the last 4 years. Can't remember. But I had the pleasure of touring with him when I was on staff in 2018 in Poland. And I actually was able to go physically with Ayal through Auschwitz. And it was eye-opening and just so informative. So Ayal, without further ado, it's all yours.
Hi everyone. Thanks for joining in. We're going to try to do something interesting today, and that's a virtual tour from our comfortable homes in what in many ways became a symbol of horror. I think that the word Auschwitz, for many people that don't know much about the Holocaust, it means something. And we're going to try to possibly examine and maybe answer the question, what makes that place so special? Obviously in a horrific way and manner. So I'm going to start by sharing the screen. If there's any questions, we're going to try to do it via the chat, or at least in between. I'm going to try to open up some spaces for questions. If for some reason I can't see it when I'm sharing the screen, which happens. So Mark, if you could just be on it and follow the questions and then pass it to me at some point that you feel is right. So let's start. So before we actually dive into the virtual tour, I want us to get a little bit of a background. That way, at least our terminology will be right. And I think that maybe we're going to try to understand a little bit what is the world of camps. And there's two kinds of definitions. There's death camps and there's concentration camps. And 1 second, I see here that I can't actually read the chat over there. So if it's crucial, just let me know, please. There's two types of camps within the Nazi world and within the context of the Holocaust. One is concentration camp and the other one is death camp. I know that we brushed upon it in our last session, but it's a little bit of an important terminology and definition. That way we'll be with the same language. Concentration camps were created in Germany. They weren't necessarily aimed for Jews. And the main goal was to induce fear in the society in order to reduce any waves of rebellion or people that would go against the rulers. The method of concentration camps is a method that we're familiar with from other totalitarian systems. Concentration camps exist in China. They existed in Russia. They exist in many places. It's not something that necessarily Nazi Germany has made up, and it definitely existed before that. But the general idea of a concentration camp is if I am an individual coming into a concentration camp, very quickly I am stripped of my personal identity and I become an insignificant number, which breaks down my soul. And the main goal of a concentration camp is to reduce any ambition or desire to revolt and go against the specific leader or the dictatorship that exists. So a methodology that exists in concentration camps, for example, is prisoners' clothes, is the fact that the inmates do not have names or private possessions, but they get numbers. Now, I know that you're familiar with numberings that exist in Auschwitz in the format of tattooing those numbers. That's taking it another step. But in many concentration camps, inmate had numbers. It wasn't necessarily tattooed, it was sewed or written on their clothes, but they were a number. The day-to-day life in a concentration camp would usually be a lot of humiliation and a lot of forced slave labor to break the spirit and also to gain some profit from the slave labor. So concentration camps exist in Germany pretty much when Hitler rises to power. The first concentration camp is Dachau. It's created in 1933. Yes, there are Jewish inmates there, but no, it's not because they're Jewish. It's because they are writers or thinkers or communists or whatever that might be. And there's many concentration camps that exist. Death camp is a unique structure that is created for Jews with a goal to eliminate in a fast and in a efficient in terms of the expenses and in terms of the time to eliminate and kill prisoners. And death camps were created for the Jewish population as part of the final solution, which we've already discussed in our previous session, so I'm not going to go into that in too much depth. So there are death camps that exist in Poland. The main ones are Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, and Chelmno. But if you look at this map over here, you can see that there's a map that defines concentration camps. Some of them you might have heard of in the name: Mauthausen, Dachau, Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, Ravensbrück. These are many camps that maybe if you have any family or read of Holocaust survivors, many of the survivors of the Holocaust are actually released in the concentration camps that exist in Germany. But if you look at where the area of Poland is, you'll find that there aren't any concentration camps there, but there's death camps. And one of those places, or two of these places, which are a little bit confusing, are Majdanek and Birkenau Auschwitz. And the reason that they're confusing is that those two places had also elements of concentration camps, but also elements of death camps. Let me be a little bit clear, maybe give an example. If a train arrives to Sobibor, everyone dies. It doesn't matter if you are strong, or you're healthy, or you're sick, or you're 90 years old, or you're 20 years old. Everyone off the train goes into the gas chambers and is killed. That's an extermination camp. In Auschwitz, in theory, if they need inmates, there will be a selection, and 10% will go and become prisoners in the concentration camp of Auschwitz. 90% will go to extermination. Sometimes there's going to be enough prisoners, so everyone is going to go to extermination. But the act that defines if you have even the slightest option to survive or live another day as an inmate already makes it a combination, and not only a death camp, but a combination between concentration camp as well as a death camp. So if you're wondering how is it that the concentration camps exist in Germany, versus the death camps exist in Poland, it has to do with German society. It is understood, correctly or not, I'm not getting into that topic right now, that the German people would not necessarily accept the fact that they will have death camps on their soil. Meaning concentration camps is, I might agree, I might disagree, and so on. But a death camp, no, that's a little bit too much. So where are the death camps located? In an occupied area where the population itself, the Polish population, Germany doesn't care about. They also kill a bunch of them as well. So it's like not a big deal. So they're not looking for publicity or to get along with them or to look good. So that's why we'll find the death camps in Poland versus many concentration camps that exist in Germany. Now, in the pure experience of a Holocaust survivor, they might define a concentration camp in their narrative as a death camp, because the lifespan of a person in a concentration camp, especially if they're Jewish and they're not like a privileged inmate, is an average 3 months survival. So is it not a death camp? It is a death camp. Just it takes a little bit more time. It's not immediately. So that's a little bit about the terminology of death camps and concentration camps, because I think one thing, maybe one of the reasons that Auschwitz is so well known is the fact that it's not only a death camp. And by the fact that it's not only a death camp, it means that there's inmates there. And once there's inmates, there's a possibility for survivors. And if there's a possibility of survivors, there's an option of testimonies. What I'm trying to say is that places like Chełmno, Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec as death camps, while together exterminated over 1 million Jews, don't have more than 200 people in the end of the war that can actually tell what happened there. Those are the numbers. Auschwitz-Birkenau, any guesses? Anyone want to guess? Open for the crowd. How many survivors do we have in 1945 of Auschwitz? I can't see the chat if people are writing it down.
Someone says 200. See if anyone else puts a number in.
Any other numbers?
We have one guess for 1,000.
So I'll give you the answer. You're far away. 60,000.
All right. Someone said 10,000.
60,000 survivors from Auschwitz. Now let's just assume that out of the 60,000, only 20% of the Holocaust survivors will tell their story. It's a high number. There's probably less. Let's assume there's 10% that are going to tell their story. That is 6,000 testimonies. That's one of the reasons that we hear about Auschwitz, because we have so many survivors from there. But it has to do with the fact that this camp was also large. So we'll get to that in a moment. Let's try to figure out what makes it so special. So what makes Auschwitz so unique? There's a few criteria that put him on the map as the unique place. One would be the number of survivors, which I just mentioned. 60,000 survivors is a very large number. The second thing is the tattooing of the prisoners is something unique. If you've ever met a Holocaust survivor with a tattoo on their arm, he or she were in Auschwitz. It doesn't mean that they were liberated from Auschwitz. It doesn't mean that they spent the majority of their prisoner's life in Auschwitz, but it means that they went through the process of becoming an inmate in Auschwitz. So it's something physical that we see that already raises awareness. Another thing, it's an international camp. Jews in Auschwitz. Auschwitz was created to be the final solution, not for Poland. Because at the time that it's created, there aren't many Jews in Poland. They're already gassed and killed in Treblinka, Belzec, and Sobibor, in the death camps. Auschwitz is created to exterminate the Jews from Hungary, France, Belgium, Denmark, Holland, Algeria, Rhodes, Greece, and so on and so on. It's supposed to be the European center of extermination. Now, what does it mean that it's an international camp? It means that in the end of the Holocaust, when there's 60,000 survivors that came out of Auschwitz, we have Primo Levi that will write his memories in Italian. We'll have Elie Wiesel writing it in French. We'll have Viktor Frankl writing it in German. And before there's even translations to all these books, we have an international language that goes on and tells the story and testimonies, which makes it very much well known in the world. And maybe the last point, but I do not think that that's the only reason. It cannot be the only reason. It's the high death rate. The estimation is between 1.3 to 1.5 million Jews were exterminated and killed on the grounds of Auschwitz, which is the highest number per one camp. But to call it one camp would be a little bit not accurate. Auschwitz in many ways is a symbol. And we're familiar with the symbol of the numbers, we're familiar with the name, and we're familiar also with the sign that says work will free. All of these become symbol within the culture. So let's take a look at aerial pictures that we can see over here that were taken by the lovely American Army during World War II, where they were flying above and knowing exactly what the hell is going on there. And I'm going to start with the left picture over here, because this will give us a little bit proportions. Can you see the cursor that's moving over here? Great. So the cursor over here is looking at the larger camp, known as Auschwitz II, or known as also as Birkenau. But Auschwitz I, which we're going to go and visit in this tour, is actually only this little part over here. We have over here a small camp. This is enlarged on the right side. It's the camp which is actually enlarged. But we have a much larger camp compound known as Birkenau Auschwitz II. Within the vicinity of Auschwitz, there's the small camp, which is known as Auschwitz I. That's the one with the sign, work will free you, and so on. Then there's Birkenau, which is the larger camp that has more gas chambers, more crematoriums, much more inmates. And also then there's other camps as well, meaning when we're talking about Auschwitz, we're not talking necessarily about one camp. We're talking about an accumulation of three major camps, Auschwitz I, II, and III, and another 30 small farms and sub-camps that are around the area. All of the prisoners that are there went through the process of becoming prisoners, meaning they are wearing inmates' clothes, they got tattooed, their hair was shaved, their private property was taken away from them, but they are not necessarily in the exact same place, meaning they're scattered in an area. Specifically, this camp is also in the middle of a swamp area, which means that there's nothing near it. So if anyone would even in theory run away, their chances of actually getting out of there are very, very slim. And we'll maybe talk later on a little bit about someone that managed to escape Auschwitz and what happened to him. So hopefully this little quick intro gives us an understanding of a few things. We're talking about a small part today, Auschwitz I, of a much larger complex. And also we're talking about something that's unique in the sense that it's also a concentration camp and also a death camp. Unfortunately, the story of the death camp is a story that's not told. And the reason for that is that there's no survivors. While there's 1.3 to 1.5 million people that entered these camps and were exterminated within an hour or 2 hours or maybe 3 hours, depending on how many trains were there, that is a story that we're not going to hear. The stories that we always hear are the stories of the ones that for some freak reason, they became inmates and they were lucky enough to survive another day and eventually get to liberation. Those are the stories that we're familiar with. But it's important to say that we have 60,000 survivors and 1.3 to 1.5 million Jews that are exterminated. Those are the proportions. So the likelihood of people surviving is extremely slim. I'm going to leave this and switch into the actual website over here. But are there any questions before I move on?
So far, nothing.
Sorry?
So far, no, nothing in our Q&A or our chat.
Okay, if there's any questions, yes.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing because you skimmed over it. I think for
Sure.
those people who are listening, they need a little bit more clarification because many of us, my generation, being children of and grandchildren of, have grown up with this idea is that all the death camps were in Poland because the Poles hated us the most, and the Poles were the most collaborative, and the Poles were the ones who wanted them there. And I grew up with that well, and it took me years to work my way out of it. But I want everybody to be clear. All these death camps that were located in Poland were not because the Poles were more complicit than the Ukrainians or the Hungarians or the Romanians or yada, yada, yada. It is because of numbers. Number one, the largest Jewish population in Eastern Europe was in Poland. So why bring the masses outside to another country when you have the masses inside the country? Poland was also the most was more central than other countries. And also you have to remember that Poland itself, the Poles themselves, were under a regime of terror as well. The Nazis had conquered them in a brutal war and were not kind to the Poles either. Not that that gives any excuse for any bad behavior that Poles might have perpetrated on anybody. But to say that the death camps were in Poland because of the Poles would be inaccurate and would be unfair to history. We must always remember that the death camps were there and the idea of them were because of the Nazi Party, and that's where the blame needs to stay. That's it.
Beautifully said. And I think it's a really good intro to the fact that when we're looking at this compound, this is, by the way, I highly recommend if you want to explore later on after this session, the website is written over here, panorama.auschwitz.org. It also has an option to explore the compounds of Birkenau, which we're not going to be doing today, which is Auschwitz II, the much larger one. So feel free to go into it later on. It's important to say that this camp, when it was created originally, it was a Polish garrison during World War I, which later on becomes a concentration camp. And the first inmates are not Jews. The first inmates of Auschwitz, when it's Auschwitz I over here, are Polish people, which as a concentration camp is there for people who resist the Nazi regime. So, so we're going to dive into this momentarily, but I want us to take a look over here. We're standing in an aerial view right in front of the entrance of Auschwitz I. This building is the building of the entrance to the museum, and over here you can already see the compound of the site itself. You can see that there's two-story buildings over here. They have roofs. It's not like barracks maybe that exist in other places. This is a brick structure. And outside of the residential area is the extermination area, which we'll get to later on. But this is the size of it. We're talking about a camp that was built in 1940. Originally was there to host Polish prisoners. Later on, in its height, it held 20,000 prisoners. That was the maximum capacity of it. And when we're talking about, maybe just to give proportions, Birkenau, the camp that I showed you over here, the larger camp, it hosted 150,000 prisoners. So that's just to give you the proportion, 150,000 versus 20,000. So also the likelihood of knowing people that actually were in this camp is less. Not that necessarily prisoners knew exactly where they were at any given moment. It wasn't that they had beautiful signs saying, welcome to Auschwitz 1, welcome to Auschwitz 2. They didn't really know what was going on there. But in terms of many of the testimonies that we read of survivors, there's a higher likelihood that they were actually in Birkenau than they were in Auschwitz 1. But this is the command center of the whole operation of the compound of Auschwitz. And before we go in, I want to maybe read to you a testimony by an interesting guy named Yechiel Dinu, but he never goes by the name of Yechiel Dinu. Only in the Eichmann trial he was introduced there. His name that he goes and his pen name is Katsetnik. Katsetnik means prisoner of camp. And Katsetnik is an author that after the Holocaust moves to Israel, and he gives testimony in the Eichmann trial. And in the Eichmann trial, he says the following. I've lived there almost 2 years. The time isn't there like the time anywhere on earth. Every fraction of a second moves differently on time's wheel. And the habitants of this planet had no names, had no parents, and had no sons. They didn't dress the same clothes we wear here. They didn't born or procreate. They breathed by different nature rules. They didn't live or die by the rules of this world. When Katsetnik comes to describe his experience as a Holocaust survivor in Auschwitz, he refers to it as a different planet. And I want to hold that question, is this a different planet or not? And maybe what is the price that we pay when we call this a different planet, educationally? And why does he need maybe to call it a different planet? What is his need for that? But we'll get to that question in the end. Let's talk a little bit about details. We're going to switch now to a map over here. This map shows us a little bit the camp from above. And we're going to dive in over here into this picture over here, which you're familiar with. Work will free you. The famous sentence, which doesn't exist only in Auschwitz, but over here it became very famous, again, due to the reason of so many survivors. The entrance to the camp that is guarded by a double barbed wire, electrocuted, that prisoners are not allowed to go within the vicinity of 5 meters from it or they will be shot. And this is the pathway the prisoners go out to their slave labor out of the camp and come back in, which on the way out, they have over here next to the tree, they have an orchestra. And I think that in order to try and maybe get into the logic of camp and concentration camp life, one must put aside their logic and put aside everything that makes sense in the world. Because according to this sentence, work will free you, one can assume that if you will work hard and be an efficient worker, you will survive, you will be free from this place. But in reality, it's exactly the opposite. If you work hard and you exhaust all your resources, you will die faster. Music, which is usually something to soothe your soul, in a concentration camp becomes a tool to give you the beat in order to go into slave labor, or be the music and the soundtrack for those who wait to go into gas chambers. Everything is slightly upside down here in this upside down world. And one of the, in my opinion, the most interesting and possibly the brave Holocaust survivors that I've read their books is Primo Levi. And I'm going to recommend a book that you read, so it's going to be this one. And later on, there's going to be a session about book recommendations and stuff like that. But Survival in Auschwitz is definitely a great, great book. He writes in his book that if the world of concentration camps would continue for a few more years, there would be a need for a new language. Now, let me read this to you, okay? We'll give him some respect. Just as hunger is not that feeling of missing a meal, so our way of being cold has need of a new word. We say hunger, we say tiredness, fear, pain, we say winter, and they are different things. They are free words, created and used by free men who lived in comfort and suffering in their homes. If the lagers is a terminology for the camps and the blocks where they lived, the inmates. If the lagers had lasted longer, a new harsh language would have been born. And only this language could express what it means to toil the whole day in the wind, with the temperature below freezing, wearing only a shirt, underpants, a cloth jacket, and trousers, and in one's body nothing but weakness, hunger, and knowledge of the end drawing near. What Primo Levi is essentially saying is that every words that we are going to use, me, Ayal Beer, sitting here in the comfort of my house, drinking this great cup of coffee that I made for myself, I am not going to be able to transmit the horror and the difficulties and the harshness of this world. And that is a very brave statement. Primo Levi in the 80s cannot live with his horrors and dreams, and eventually will take his life. He's going to commit suicide. He's not going to be able to live with the nightmares of surviving Auschwitz. And truth has to be said that people might have been liberated from the camp, but there's so many survivors that found themselves living the camp still on till the day they die. And maybe that's one of the biggest tragedies of the Holocaust, that even when it ends in 1945, people are suffering so much and for so many years with memories and haunted dreams that they have. So on the 27th of April, 1940, Heinrich Himmler commands to create a concentration camp. In the beginning, there's about 11 houses that are over here. Later on, they grow to 29 two-story houses over here. I wanted to go and see a little bit what this place looks like inside. So we're going to try some of these places. You could actually go and see what they look like inside. So we're now in block number 2. This doesn't look this way. Today, if you would go to Auschwitz, there's exhibits with information in all kinds of places. But over here for this panorama view, they allowed us to go, and they kind of took off everything in order to be able to see the barren walls over here. What we see over here is the actual structure. Obviously, there's been many years, so they had to maintain it a little bit. In some of the barracks, there were no beds. People stayed on the floor. They slept on the floor. There was obviously no heating. We're talking about Poland throughout the winter. There isn't much in this block over here, but we're going to go up to the floor over here. You're able to see that there's a second floor, and over here this is a much larger room which was created. In terms of amount of inmates, we're talking about 700 to 1,200 inmates living in a block of 2 stories. No bathrooms. Okay, I want you to notice that there's no bathrooms over here. So what does it mean? Zero privacy, wake-up calls. This is what it looks like. We're going to take a look at there's another block over here that we're right now we're not going to look at, because what I want us to take a look at over here is block number 11. Block number 11 is a unique block in the sense that it didn't have inmates living in it, meaning the majority of all these blocks, these 2-story structures, had as I said, 700 to 1,200 prisoners in it. Their day-to-day life would be wake up in the crack of dawn, come over here to this roll call center in this area over here, standing in, standing over here for hours, being counted, being beaten. Then there would be groups that would leave the camp through the gate of the work will free you, go to work for 12 hours. At 10 o'clock would get stale piece of bread and what is known as coffee, but it's just mostly dark, warm water. That would be their nutrition. Then they would come back. Many would die along the way. Come back again to be counted, get dinner from over here. This would be the area of the kitchen in Auschwitz 1. Counted again, beaten, and then go to sleep for a few hours till the following day. So all these over here are different blocks where inmates lived in them, but there are a few blocks that are different and unique, and we're going to speak about 2 of them as an example. So one block would be block number 11. Block number 11 is known as the punishment block, the prisoners block. And maybe a good question to ask is, why on earth does one need, inside this place called Auschwitz, a prison? Meaning we have a prison within a prison. And the Nazi logic, which exists in other concentration camps as well, is that if you want to make sure that people won't rebel, you always need to have a worst option. People are more likely to follow the rules when they know that they can suffer more. And this is a cell that had a few functions to it. For example, an inmate that would be slacking on the job or stealing food or even stealing you're not allowed as a prisoner to have any possessions. So if you would find a piece of nail that would be very efficient for you because you could sew with it or cut bread with it or even carve your name somewhere. That way people would remember what their name is. That was illegal. So if you would be caught, you would come to this place over here and you would stand for trial. Now, while you would be standing for trial, it wasn't anything that you had any control over because everyone would come out guilty from this trial. So we have over here in this block an office. Let's take a look at this place over here. What we're able to see over here is beds of inmates. And this is a place where people would wait. But let's say that you were caught with whatever that might be that you were convicted of. I'm trying to look for the way. It's hard. It's much easier, by the way, to navigate when you're actually walking and you're not in a website. So over here, we're able to see a gallows. Many of the executions were public in order to induce fear with the prisoners. So we have over here a gallows over here, and give me a second and I'll find a way to actually walk down the stairs here because that option does exist. I think it should be over here and to the left. Sorry, I'm a little bit disoriented here. Not here. Is that? Okay, I think I figured it out. If there's any questions, by the way, now is a great time as I'm wandering around in this place. Yes, this is what I was looking for. What we have over here is an execution wall that exists. This execution wall is outside of block 11. Block 11 is as I said, the place where people would go and have their trials, a prison within a prison, and many of the executions would take place over here. There's a few other things that I want us to take a look at in this place. So we're going to go inside for a moment, and hopefully we'll be able to see it. One moment. If this is making you dizzy, then just close your eyes and I'll call you in a moment, okay? Oh, wait, I'm going back here. Sorry.
That's okay. We're still with you, Ayal.
I apologize. I'm just much better in navigating in the real world, and it's always throwing me back to the wrong place. So we'll
I
get
find
there.
it much better to see it in the virtual world.
Yes. Wait, here. This should help us now, possibly. There is. There we go. Here it is. I've always skipped this turn, right? I always went to the other way. Here's the stairs. Thank you. Thank you so much for your patience. Once we go down, this is actually the inmate cells over here. So I want to point out a few things. We walked to the stairs downwards, and now we're going into the actual inmate cells over here. Now, I promise you it's much more creepier when you're actually there. But we are currently, what is interesting about this virtual tour here is that as a visitor, you can't actually go into the cells. You're not able to go to. We are currently in a one of the cells over here. What you're able to notice is that there's writings on the wall over here. Can you see them? All kinds of sketches where people carved their names in different places. This one is dedicated to actually a Christian priest that he went into a starvation cell, which is a cell as it sounds. People go there without food and eventually they die out of starvation. And he did it because he was taking the blame for some other inmate that took that. He's considered a saint within Poland. So this is his starvation cell. We're going to take a look at another prisoner cell here. You're able to actually see here carving on the wall over here of inmates. Different carving names. There's over here a year 1941.
Sorry, Ayal.
Yes, sorry.
Question.
Yes.
How many people would be in the prison in Block 11 at a time, approximately?
It's hard to say because there's some cells that would have people there alone in starvation cells. And there would be also cells that would be empty. It was mostly an issue of necessity of creating order. So there isn't, unlike the other cells that would host 12,000 prisoners, over here there wasn't necessarily a need for a certain number. Meaning as long as people are afraid and as long as people are induced with that fear, then there's no real need for it to have so many people. So I want us to see a specific cell over here, and it's again, I apologize for walking around. It's not going to happen in the rest of the tour over here, but it's kind of like a labyrinth, the whole place over there. Right, I'm going back and forward over here. But if you have any further questions, now is a really great time. Okay, so we were there and we didn't go over here. So let's take a look over here on this side. What we're able to see over here is standing cells. What is a standing cell? A prisoner would crawl in through this door and stand up, and there wouldn't be enough space for someone to sit down. Meaning, when I'm standing up, I'm gonna examine this for you. When I'm standing up, I'm holding this amount of space. When I'm sitting down, I'm actually holding more space. These cells were designed for people not to be able to sit down. So you crawl in and you stand there, and sometimes there's a few people over there, and eventually you collapse because of your feet don't hold you out of exhaustion and so on. As similar to starvation cells, also over there, there isn't food. So the whole method of prisoner cells over here is really to break the person down. What we have over here is standing cells. Prisoners were confined there 4 at a time for several or more than a dozen nights. They had to stay in overnight and they had to work during the day. Many died in consequence of suffocation and exhaustion. No one's supposed to come out of these prison cells or from this block alive. It's impossible. No one can come out not guilty from the trial. It's part of the whole concept of creating some sort of illusion as if people have choice, and therefore they try to follow the rules, but the rules don't make sense. Because if you work hard, you're going to die from exhaustion. If you try to steal and survive another day and you're caught, you're going to die. There's no way out. And in the end of the day, a prisoner is not supposed to live more than 3 to 4 months in terms of nutrition, in terms of hard labor, and so on. That's why it's very difficult to find prisoners of concentration camps that aren't people that arrived in the last 6 months of the war. Where are the Jews that arrived in 1942 to Auschwitz? They're gone because they don't survive, because by 1943 they're already dead. So if many of you have family or friends that are survivors from Auschwitz, I wouldn't be surprised if they're Hungarians. Why is that? Because the Hungarians come relatively last. They come in July, August of 44. So they have a higher likelihood to survive till January 45. It's a matter of time when you actually arrive to the place. So I think I want to speak a little bit about maybe an example of 2 people. I think it's a nice story or an interesting story. Mila and Adik. Mila and Adik were both prisoners of Auschwitz, very different. Adik is prisoner on number 503. He's a Polish prisoner that arrives relatively early. Mila is I want to say a Czechoslovakian Jew. She speaks many languages. She is apparently beautiful, and they fall in love. And they actually have a relationship in which Adik is going to escape Birkenau, Auschwitz, and he's going to run away with her. And the way that he does it is that he steals clothes of an SS officer. He goes into her barracks, he takes her out, and they start marching out of the camp. And for 14 days, they run away through the swamps. After 14 days in a village, they go into a grocery store. Mila goes in to buy bread. There's over there a random patrol of SS soldiers. They feel that something is wrong, that something's suspicious over here. They capture her. They obviously see her tattoo on her hand, something that you can't really hide. Adik comes out of his hiding place and he goes with her. Both of them are caught and are brought to Block 11. That's why I'm bringing this story. And when they're in Block 11, they are caught in July 6th. So it's in this month many years ago. But they're executed on September 15th. So it means that from July, August, and half of September, they are being tortured in the Block 11, beaten and so on. Eventually, there's going to be an execution where they're going to take them to Birkenau. Mila manages to steal a razor. Before she's being hung, she cuts her wrists, slaps the Nazi soldier, and screams, everyone should be free. They take her to the crematorium, and they want to burn her alive, but she dies before she actually arrives there. Adik has his rope on his neck. He kicks his own chair and screams, "Freedom for Poland," and commits suicide. That's how the story ends. The story of Mila is something that is told by women prisoners in at least 7 different testimonies that they describe this event of the victory of the spirit. These are 2 people, a very unique story, by the way. Also the fact that they've escaped Auschwitz, and also the fact that there's a love story here, and like there's like the material for a good Hollywood film, I guess. But this event also takes place in Block 11. So if both of them are prisoners from maybe another camp, which means that Block 11 is not only for the small Auschwitz camp. It's also a prison cell for other people as well.
Ayal, just another question while we're on Block 11. We know that Jews had positions of power in the camps, but did they have the power to put people in Block 11?
I'm not sure that I would agree to the statement of Jews having power in the camp. Power that was given to inmates, whether they're Jews or not Jews, was always a relatively limited amount of power, meaning it was more privilege than actual power. The privilege was maybe more food or easier jobs, or the ability to be in charge of other people and therefore gaining some sort of power, whether it's capo or something like that. But the actual ability to put people in Block 11 was not something that I'm aware of that any inmates actually had. It was a privilege or a right that only the Nazi or the guards had the ability to do something like that. As far as I know, I don't know of any example of that. I want to share maybe another block before we move on to the area of extermination, which is also another place, and that's block number 10. Now, block number 10, for anyone that has been in Auschwitz-Birkenau in the past at least 15 years, I know that when Risa was there way back, she told me that it was open and available and open for the public. Today it isn't, okay? It's not at all. Sorry, this was not what I wanted to do. Block 11 is right next to block 10. If we go and stand outside, what you're able to see over here is while here the windows maybe are shut over here, but there's windows over here. In block number 10, which is right nearby, all the windows are totally closed. They're all shut. So what happened in block number 10? Block number 10 is known as the site of the experimentation. The Nazi regime was using human guinea pigs, or experimenting on humans, obviously in a very non-ethical way, in a variety of fields. They were experimenting with nerve gas. They were experimenting with hypothermia. They were experimenting with burns. They were experimenting with phosphor. They were experimenting with genetic experimentation, whether it's people that are challenged in their height, or whether it's twins, or a lot of experimentations that had to do with trying to create more children for the Aryan race. So they were experimenting in what is the I'm blanking on the terminology for women not being able to have children. What is the word that I'm looking for?
Sterilization.
Thank you, Risa. So sterilization. And all these experiments were being conducted mainly on Jewish prisoners. Why? Because Jews are a sub-race there. Why not? So mostly we're familiar with Dr. Mengele as the person that dealt with experimentations with twins, but he's not the only one. And to be honest, he's also not the main one. There's other doctors, and there's people that were in charge of him. Most of the work that he was doing is not here specifically. In block 10, most of the work had to do with sterilization. If we go into block 10 over here, what we're able to see, which is something that, again, I've never been in this block. This is the only way that I'm actually able to see it, is through this website. What we're able to see over here is we're able to see inmates' drawing of their experiences. This is drawn on the wall, and it was drawn by an inmate over here in a room. It's not open to the public. So this is one thing that we can see over here. As well as, right, as well as we're able to see over here a larger room. It has over here more drawings. If you look closely, you're able to see more drawings of inmates over here on the wall. There's something else that I wanted to see here. So this place over here has quite horrific stories in this place over here. I think, yes, this is something that we've seen already. So this is block number 10, and maybe a story that relates to this is a story of a man. I'll show you a picture of him. Second. Not sure if you're able to see it. I'm hoping that you are. Can you see this? Kind of. What you're seeing here is a man and a woman and a child named Ovadia Baruch. Ovadia and Aliza Baruch are Jews from Saloniki, a community that experienced the Holocaust very, very harshly. One of the communities that had actually the most casualties and most people that were killed during the Holocaust in proportion and percentage to Jewish communities, the Jews of Saloniki. And Aliza and Ovadia Baruch actually meet in Auschwitz. And they fall in love and have a relationship when they're in Auschwitz. Aliza is taken to block number 10 and goes through sterilization experiments. And one of the doctors there that was a Jewish French prisoner doctor that was working for, obviously forced to do so with the Nazis, was a helper there and was taking her into a surgery of sterilization. And for some freak reason, there was some sort of alarm and all the doctors left and he was left alone to be with her. And she was cursing him and telling him that he's the Satan and he's working with the Nazis and he's doing something terrible. And by the way, she's about 16, 17 years old at the time. We're not talking about someone that's necessarily a grown woman. This is what she's going through. And he tells her, survive, one day you'll thank me. Years afterwards, she's going to survive Auschwitz. She's going to meet Ovadia. They're going to meet in Saloniki in the Jewish community center there. They're going to decide to move to the state of Israel and get married. And she tells him, but you should know that I don't have any children. I'm not going to have any children. I want you to sign on this paper that you're willing to get married with me as long, knowing that I'm not going to have any children. And he says, no problem, I'll do that. Everything's fine. I love you. They get married. After they move here to Israel and they live in a dairy farm in a shack next to Kfar Saba, because they don't have a house because they're obviously refugees after the Holocaust. One day she comes to him and she says, something's happening in my stomach. And she's pregnant. And eventually she's going to have her and Ovadia are going to have 2 children. And only then she understands that this doctor was showing as if he's conducting the sterilization while he was messing up the whole process. This is one story of many, but there's many stories of these the sterilization and what went on here. And I think that it's another maybe example of the lack of logic or lack of normality that exists in this planet called Auschwitz is the idea that doctors are supposed to be people that take care of health and they're trying to benefit people, while the doctors over here are doing exactly the opposite. So music isn't music that we know, hunger isn't hunger that we know, tiredness is not tiredness that we know, logic of ethics of work is not the same, justice system and prison is not the same, and also doctors are not the same. So what does it mean for a Holocaust survivor to survive a place like Auschwitz and then try to adapt back to the normal world that we're familiar with? This whole area over here, which you can see filled with barracks, is the inmate area. And what you can notice is that it's all surrounded by a barbed wire electric fence. And suddenly we're getting into an area that's outside with trees. And let's take a look at where we are. We're standing outside of a bunker. This was originally built as a bunker. If you remember, during World War I, this is a garrison of the Polish army, which is later on developed into a concentration camp. And there's air raids, and therefore there's a bunker over here. In September 1941, there's the first experiment using Cyclone B as a gas of extermination. They changed the bunker into a gas chamber. It's pretty easy. You just close it all up. You create holes in the ceiling and you toss Cyclone B inside. The first people that were exterminated there were 600 Soviet prisoners of war. And later on, when they saw that it actually works, they used it as a gas chamber as well as also a crematorium, meaning when prisoners arrive, some will become inmates, some will go directly to being exterminated. The idea of a gas chamber and a crematorium is for health maintenance. If you're exterminating so many bodies and you want to save time and energy from burying them, cremating them is the most hygiene thing. I'm sorry if this is harsh words, but the reality was very technical in the sense that the Nazis were trying to think of the most efficient way. And the most efficient way to deal with masses of bodies is cremation. So what we have here is a relatively small gas chamber, but its significance is of two. One, when they see that it works here, they're going to create a much better organized model which will exist in Birkenau. While Auschwitz I, 20,000 inmates, has one gas chamber, Auschwitz II, 150,000 inmates, has 4 functioning gas chambers with 2 levels of a place that can have much more prisoners in the same time and much more ovens that are working. Meaning this is the first generation, and then later on what the Nazis do is they adapt, create changes, and better the system to be more functioning. So this crematorium gas chamber was working between the fall of 1941 and the summer of 1943. The reason that it stops in the summer of 1943 is that it is too much of a primitive mechanism to be a gas chamber. The time and the energy in this one is not worth it. There's already 4 functioning gas chambers that are much more efficient in Birkenau, and it's closer to the train tracks, and therefore people that are going to extermination are already diverted directly to Birkenau. And just to give you maybe a numbers, within 100 days, an estimated number of 400,000 people were killed and exterminated in Birkenau within the 4 gas chambers and crematoriums. The Hungarian Jews, between June, July, and August 1944, which is the height of productivity of extermination in Birkenau. So what does this place look like from inside? There's the first room over here. You enter. This would be the entrance. You're able to see that there's a peek hole over here for the people to see if everyone has died inside or not. First room would be a room where people would get undressed, or sometimes they would get undressed on the outside. They would go into this room over here. You're able to notice maybe that there's entrances on the ceiling. That way the Cyclone B can be dropped down. If you look closely on the wall, you're able to see scratches over here. These are the scratches of the people that have been suffocating and trying to escape. We're able to see that over here, even closer on the walls over here. This is an area that you're able to see around over here. And in the other room, which was blocked by obviously a door that doesn't exist over here, you go into the other room, which inmates would take the bodies of the deceased from the room over here, place them in these ovens, and cremate them. So we have here 4 ovens that exist in this place. This is the back of the ovens, what it looks like over here. This is, by the way, areas that you can't go today in when you're visiting this place. There's no way that you can get so close to the cremation over here, and doors to exit this place. And this is it. This is the site of extermination. Now, did the majority of the Jewish population found themselves dying over here, of the inmates over here? No. Many did, but many also were beaten or hung or tortured. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're talking about a site that is also a concentration camp, but also a death camp in the same way. So we're more or less towards the end. We've explored Auschwitz as an idea and as a symbol. And we spoke a little bit about Auschwitz I being some sort of a prototype, but the more organized and larger compound would actually be Birkenau. We've spoken a little bit about life of the inmate and the concept of how language is a barrier for us to even understand that time period. We spoke a little bit about the idea of a prison within a prison, torturing and experimentation, and a little bit about the beginning of the methodology of extermination through Cyclone B. So while this was a pretty dark session, and I apologize if it ruined your Sunday, I think it's important, and there's time now for questions. I will say that if you want, you're more than welcome to send me an email, whether it's to ask what are the books that I recommend or movies or stuff like that. Feel free to reach out, and I'll be more than happy to help. But if you want, we have now a few moments, like about 10-15 minutes for questions. Risa, Mark, if you have anything to add, go for it.
So I don't have anything to add at the moment, but there is a question, so we can start with that. Why was there so much of Auschwitz left after the war when a camp like Treblinka was demolished?
It's a great question. Treblinka is a factory that has no more work. Meaning Treblinka's goal was to exterminate the Jews of Poland. And once that job was done, there was no need for Treblinka, Sobibor, Belgians. So if you're a factory that's taking gold out of the ground and you've You used all the gold in the area. You don't need that factory anymore. So just dismantle the factory and move to somewhere else, or hide that factory if it's doing something that you feel is awful. While Auschwitz was also a site that, first of all, was liberated while there were still inmates there, meaning it didn't get to its full potential or goal. And also the goal to begin with wasn't only extermination, it was also it was also a concentration camp and a place of slave labor. So when the Russians arrive in January 1945, some of the camp is actually set on fire by the Nazis that flee from them, and that's why not everything has remained intact, but a lot stays there because they were still in the process of it being still in use. But it's a great question. Let's see, any other questions? Can I ask your thoughts on the correlation between Nazi Germany and the current situation towards people of color in America? Wow. I personally don't feel that I know enough about what's going on in the United States, meaning the media that I'm receiving is mostly liberal media, because that's, I don't know, I guess that's where I wander around, and that's my echo chamber. So I don't know too much about that topic specifically. I think that maybe the correlation is the issue of othering someone else, meaning in every genocide or every hate crime, maybe the link that is connected is that I don't see the other as a human being, but I see him as a mass, and therefore I am allowed to say, do, or think atrocious things regarding him or her. I think maybe that's the correlation that I'm able to see. And I can see that parts of American society, and by the way, I think it exists unfortunately in any country. I don't think that America is terrible. Like, I'm sure that I don't. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I'm sure that racism also exists to a certain extent, also in Canadian culture, and also in Israeli culture, and in European culture. Like, hating the other or othering people can potentially exist in any other place. And maybe actually I want to use that question as a starting point to touch upon something that I mentioned in the beginning. When Kaczynski tells us that Auschwitz is a different planet, he's actually making life much easier for us. Because if it's a different planet, it can't happen again, right? If it's a different planet, it's not my planet. Those atrocious things that happened over there, they have nothing to do with me. I'm a good person. Everyone around me is nice. Everyone around me is great. But what if it's not a different planet? What if the same hatred and craziness and sadism that existed there exists still in some levels in 2020 around us? How is that more scary? And what does it force us to do as individuals that live in this time? And what does it make Holocaust education so important? Because it's no longer a history lesson. I'm not interested in Holocaust education because I'm interested in facts that happened in the past. I'm interested in Holocaust education because I think that by learning it, it makes us better people to ensure that these things never happen again, to us or to anyone else. And I think that's maybe the link that I'm able to see from the current events, which again, I think that exists everywhere in the world. And I think that every person around the world is can potentially put someone in the other position. And when it's an other or someone else, and it's not me or part of my clan or my tribe or my people or whatever that might be, I can do very bad things, potentially. Any other questions?
I just gonna jump on that as well, Ayal.
Yeah.
You know, as a child of a Holocaust survivor, my dad was a child. You know him well, Ayal. One thing that I always found impossible to understand was how he, being a Jewish child, was against the law. How if something happened to him, he wasn't able to go to the local police person, policeman, woman, and get help. It terrified me, the idea that just by virtue of being a Jew, you are against the law. And I know that when I saw the replay of that scene with George Floyd and the man begging for his life, basically, and it doesn't matter what you think of George Floyd or not, he's still a person, and he had a knee on his neck and he was being suffocated. And for the first time, I felt like this only didn't happen to me or my father or my people. It's happening to other people right here in our home, North America, where we give ourselves so much kudos for being of gentle society, and how much better we have to do to ensure that all people in our country, in our continent, are treated with respect and are protected under the law. Because as Jews, we know what it feels like not to be protected under the law. So I can say that for someone with my background, it was a horrifying experience.
Thank
And
you.
one more question, Ayal. Would you be able to send us the link that you have, or how we could get Ovadia's video? You mentioned Ovadia and his love story with his wife.
Here's the thing. The video is not online. It's from Yad Vashem. It's a CD that I bought a few years ago. Now,
Okay.
I'm more than happy to contact them and see if they're able to send some sort of digital link, even purchased, and then like I'll figure it out.
Okay.
But like I only have the physical CD of it, so
Hopefully
I
they've come
love
up.
to send it.
Hopefully
That's
they've
my
come in.
birthday present for you, Risa.
Thank you.
I'll go to Yad Vashem and buy you a birthday present. How
Thank
sad
you.
is that?
Sounds good.
Just while we're on the note of resources, for everyone watching, so we've just put up on the youngjudea.ca website, there's a resource tab, which will be populated continuously as the days pass, but there is a section up there right now on LGBTQ plus education, anti-racism education. There's a Holocaust education resource section. There also soon will be for Judaism and for Israel as well. So we have put some suggestions for movies and books, and I'm sure we'll get more from you as well. So if anyone's watching wants to use that as a starting point for different forms of media and text, it's a great place to do that. So,
any last questions, thoughts?
Maybe, Ayal, you want to recommend, while we're on the topic of resources, if there's like something that you think people should this summer read or do or take more research on. Is there a book or a movie, something you think that people should absolutely read or watch? And then there is one more question after as well.
Sure. I think my number one book regarding the Holocaust would be Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I think that's a classic, amazing book that is insightful and goes way beyond Holocaust, just makes people better. That's my thought. But then there's like obviously much more nuanced books that if people are looking for specific topics and stuff like that, I'll be more than happy to recommend specifically. Let me read what's here. Thank you. What is the position? Sorry, what is your view regarding the position some Nazis took that they were just following orders and they had failed to follow orders? They and their families would be in jeopardy. Interesting question, Naomi. Thank you. So first of all, I'd say that there's an interesting Netflix movie that I just saw, The Accountant from Auschwitz, that actually deals with that question of like what the issue of liability of people that were just following orders and didn't actually kill. Like, what is my responsibility as a person that is a clerk in a system that I know does bad things, but I never was violent towards anyone. And I think it relates to that. So that's like something maybe worthwhile watching if you haven't watched. But I think that there's a lot of research that was done regarding the question of what would happen to people that wouldn't take action, people that would refuse to do bad things or to work against their conscience. Specifically, a book that deals with it is Ordinary Men by Christopher Brown, which is a phenomenal book and research that was done regarding a platoon of the Einsatzgruppen that got orders to go into a village and exterminate Jews in the pits of what was the Soviet Union that was just conquered, and there were a few people there that didn't agree to do it. And what happened to them? And what was found is that there isn't any documented case of someone refusing an order on a moral status, a Nazi person or soldier, that actually got punished for that. There isn't an example for that. And I think personally that whether people knew or did not, or were afraid of the consequences, in the end of the day, a person is judged by the morality of what happens when they're pushed against the wall, and do they listen to authority or do they listen to their personal ethics? And therefore, I don't accept this statement that it's that people were forced to do so. It's not something that I want. I don't want to live in a world where I feel that that people can use that excuse as a scapegoat. I also think that historically it didn't actually prove itself as something that people paid a price for. I hope I was able to answer that. So I want to thank you. This was lovely, although a bit dark, and I promise that the next sessions will be a little bit more uplifting, but I enjoyed myself. I don't know what it says about me that I enjoy myself at 9:30 at night speaking about Auschwitz. Maybe it says something about my messed up personality, but maybe that's why me and Risa get along. So I want to thank you very much. And again, if anyone has any questions or you need any references, please feel free to contact me, and have a great week.
Thank you so much, Ayal. We truly appreciate it. We look forward to doing more work in the future with you, and hope to see you soon in some capacity. So thank you so much for this session and for the last session. And thank you to everyone who joined us virtually. Stay tuned to find out what's coming next from CYJ this week. And yeah, everyone enjoy the rest of your days, and Ayal, sleep well. Oh, my sister was watching. She says she loves you, Ayal. My older sister. Okay, we're going to sign off. Thank you so much, Ayal. I truly appreciate it.